Can everyone hear me now? Here we go. Hello. Yes,
Yes,
okay.
I can hear you.
Okay,
I can hear
thank you.
somebody.
Thank you, thank you. Great, thank you, Michael, in the chat. We're just waiting now for quorum. So hopefully we'll have another member join us, and then we can get started, hopefully in the next 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll try to sort out our own tech here as well. Thanks for your patience, everyone. All right, we now have quorum. So, hi. So we're actually gonna go ahead and get started. I think we should still go ahead and get started while they kind of sort out the text stuff. Let me just pull up this email that I remember. Okay, cool.
What do you usually have you have Zoom on here? Also?
Yeah, the Zoom, exactly. So kind of just mirroring what we have on the screen. Okay, cool. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. Today is Thursday, February 1st, 2024. I was like, and this is the Housing and Human Services Committee. Thank you so much for joining. Really excited to kind of meet this evening. There's a lot happening in the committee and a lot of work that we'll be kind of focusing on over the next couple of months. So really looking forward to this evening's discussion. Just so you know, kind of the agenda for this evening is as follows. We'll do the kind of call to order. Welcome. We do have 2 presentations this evening. And then we also have kind of our standing agenda items, so monthly updates from elected representatives, but also monthly updates from community-based organizations. We'll then move on to old business to discuss some of the committee priorities, and then new business, and then we will close. So with that, we'll call this meeting to order because we do now have quorum at 7:12 p.m. And I'll go ahead and start. We can start with our round of introductions. Again, good evening, everyone. My name is Marielle, and I am the chair of the Housing and Human Services Committee. I will pass it over to our members on Zoom first, if that's okay, and then to our members here in person. So maybe over to you, Tanisha, since you're looking at the camera.
Hey everyone, my name is Tanisha. I am on the community board and on this committee. Hello, good evening.
Good evening, Tanisha.
Yes, I'm Marshall Vanderpool. I'm a public member on the Housing and Human Services Committee. I reside in Dyckman Houses. I'm formerly the first vice president of the Dyckman Resident Association. And I'll pass it on.
Great. Thank you, Marshall. I think those are the only members we have online. So to our members here in person.
Hi, I'm Indiana Porta, and I'm a community board member and a member of this committee.
Thank you.
Sure, I can go. Hi, I'm Michelle Lee. I'm a member of Housing and Human Services Committee, CB12, and the treasurer of CB12.
Good evening. My name is Radia Barnes. I am a member of this committee as well as the business development, and I am a lifelong Washington Heights resident.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. I'm not sure why I see 2 attendees on here, but then there's no name. Sorry. It's really a bit of a tech issue. I'm not sure what's happening. Anyway.
You already have the hosting ability, so you can
Yes.
do whatever you want with your attendees, swing them over, allow them to talk, moving.
Yes, no, thank you. I appreciate that. Yep. Okay, now I see it. Great. Thank you, everyone. So our first presentation, I'm not sure, just really quickly. Our first presentation is from Marquise Jenkins, but I do not see Marquise online. So I'm not sure. Tanisha, do you know if Marquise will still be able to join us this evening?
He just texted me that he was joining now.
Okay. So if it's okay, just to save time, because we do have a second presentation, maybe I can go ahead and ask Norma to present, and then Marquise can present afterwards.
Definitely.
Is that okay? Is that okay, Norma?
Sure, as long as it's okay with everyone else.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. So this evening we are going to have Norma Cruz Diondon. I'm not, how do you pronounce your last name?
Dieudonné. It's my husband's fault.
Yep. Thank you for correcting me. Who serves as the project director at the Jewish Board of Family and Children's Services. So I will turn it over to you. Do you have any kind of, I don't know if you want to share your screen or anything?
Yep, I have a shared screen. I have like a one pager that I can always email out, but let me share.
Sounds great. Over to you.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you everyone for allowing me to present about the Jewish Board. And so I attended just as a regular attendee last week, just to kind of get a sense of how these committees run. But I thought it was a great discussion last week around mental health services and providing support to the Community Board 12. And so I think this would be a perfect opportunity to discuss what the Jewish Board is doing now regarding mental health services, and as well as in conjunction doing a little bit more than just mental health. So like I said, my name is Norma. I'm the project director. I currently cover 2 clinics that Jewish Board provides. One is Manhattan North, which would fall in the Inwood area of Manhattan. And we also have another location in Harlem on 139th Street, which I know is not your community board. However, in the proximity of which it is, it's pretty close to the lower end of Washington Heights, so people can access both locations or either location, whichever makes the most sense. But so the Jewish Board, as many of you might have known, we've been around for quite a long time. We're really known for doing an array of mental health services, but in 2023, we were recently granted a CCBHC federal grant from SANSA. And so CCBHC stands for, we have lots of acronyms in the social work world, Certified Community Behavioral Health Clinic, right? And so the idea is that we have this new, very innovative model of care that provides access to assessments, treatments, support for both behavioral health, mental health, as well as like in addition to newer needs. Jewish Board we've received a grant that's going to be lasting about 4 years, and we have a couple of just goals in mind of what we intend to do with this new grant to really access the community. So as the grant kind of states, we're really focused on community feedback and input. So just to kind of give you a little bit more of a backstory, we have 2 clinics, as I mentioned. We have a little over 1,500 participants, clients within both both clinics. Our Inwood location on Broadway has more of an adult type of services. Our Harlem location is geared towards younger individuals, and I can explain that with the current services we have. So we have the ECTC program, which is our early childhood treatment clinic. We do have a lot of like little ones, right? Kids from like 6 months old up to the age, depending on the clinic, they can take them as high as like 13, but we do a lot of like intentional play therapy, a lot of support for kids who are recently diagnosed with autism, really kind of honing in on some of the therapeutic approaches for the itty bitty ones. Then we have a PROS program that runs a gamut throughout the city, and PROS primarily, I forget what, person recovery oriented services. There we go. So those services primarily provide support for clients who have a persistent severe mental illness and might need some more like things to do throughout the day. They have lots of group sessions, lots of therapy support, psychiatric support. They really kind of provide this like holistic model, really giving people like if they want like educational services or vocational services, as well as group work. A lot of the PROS programs provide that level of service. We also have both an adult and youth ACT team. And so ACT is assertive community treatment. So ACT it's a higher level of care, meaning that we're not in the business of trying to institutionalize a lot of people who are struggling with mental illness. This is a higher level of service, meaning that they have psychiatrists, they have psychologists, they have social workers, they have case managers, all really going to them in the home to maintain their stability in the community. That's the whole purpose of ACT. And so traditionally started with adults. Now we have expanded that service to youth because we've seen that a lot of kids don't do well in those community residence type of settings. So before we start institutionalizing kids or really putting people in a space where they're supposed to kind of be fixed, quote unquote, we don't do that. We try to really provide intentional services for clients in the community. We also have a CAFTIS team. I don't ask what CAFTIS stands for, but they provide services again, for not just kids, but for families. So maybe young moms, people who are transitioning with the families and really who need support, again, on a community basis. CPP is also one of the models that we practice mainly in our Harlem clinic because it's child psychotherapy services. So really more of a didactic model. So you're not just treating the kid, you're not just treating the mom, you're treating, you know, the whole family that's really involved in the kids' care. And then for Harlem, we also have an On Track team. And so On Track, if you might have heard of it as On Track New York City, they provide services for clients who are at the beginning onset of their mental health diagnosis. Right, so it could be very scary for a lot of people who may not know what's happening, don't know how to have support, or don't know how to ask for help. Right, our On Track team receives a lot of referrals, mainly from the hospitals, but I believe we also receive them from the community for kids who are I say kids because we start as early as I think 17 years old and we go up to 30. And that's usually onset for a lot of severe and persistent mental illness. Just educational sake, schizophrenia cannot be diagnosed until the age of 17, 18 years old. I mean, that's still on the younger end, but you can see it as high as 25 and 30. So especially for those kinds of individuals who may need support, they want to know how can they adjust what is their new normal of their lifestyle. So those are some of the services. Again, we have a host, but those are the ones out of these two clinics that are heavily utilized and have very specific departments. And so with this grant, we'll continue to provide those level of services. And the hope is that we enhance it by getting community input, right? So we have psychiatric NPs, so they do evaluations, they'll do injectables, they provide that level of service. We have LCSWs, LMSWs, LMHCs, so mental health counselors, marriage and family counselors. We do have CASACs and peers and case managers. I mean, we have a lot of people who are involved in care and very have specific roles in how to be able to provide the most holistic type of services. So definitely have a whole bunch of people. As I mentioned, is one of the largest human services agencies in the city. We also have 3 other CCBHCs. We have one in the Bronx, one in Brooklyn, and one in Staten Island. And then our Brooklyn site also has recently been approved for an OASIS license. So they'll be providing medicated assisted treatment. I believe they also might be doing methadone, not 100% sure, but they do provide services for the people who may be struggling with both mental health and substance use. Some of the benefits to the grant that we've already kind of established a lot of these things before, but really utilizing this grant to enhance those services, as I mentioned earlier. We have facilitated intakes and we're centralizing that team. So everyone knows that if you call a Jewish board and you want to be able to have an assessment and get therapy or treatment started, we have a protocol. We have availability for both in-person and telehealth services, depending on the diagnoses. We always encourage people, like, if you are qualified for a hybrid model or a telehealth model, that's fine. But if anything that's clinically sound or clinically appropriate, that you may ask people to come in person, because there's certain things that just don't translate well over telehealth. So we want to make sure that people have that option. Like I said, outpatient mental health treatment services, health monitoring, which is also a new team for us. So we'll have an RN and an LPN, or we might just have an RN do it all, but we'll have a nursing team really kind of addressing any of the medical things that may be happening. So people who have high BMIs, who may be struggling with hypertension, will be able to check their blood pressure when they come in for intakes. We'll be able to make sure they have adequate and appropriate primary care, making sure that their medical needs are being addressed as well, because we realize that we can't function in silos anymore, right? A lot of things are going to be hand in hand. So having that health team is going to be just essential and really kind of getting that picture of essential care. I'm trying to go through it fast because I don't want to take too much time. So we have health monitoring, the evidence-based care. So we have SMIs, we have coexisting disorders. The SUD team is also in addition to the CCBHC grant. So like I mentioned earlier, we don't work in silos anymore. So we'll have an SUD team, which will be comprised of a social worker, a CASAC, so someone who has a certification. Most often, CASACs have a like a lived experience, but you don't have to anymore. It really came from the idea of just that kind of peer-to-peer work that, you know, you can talk to a therapist till you're blue in the face, but the therapist may not get you on the same level as someone who's gone through that experience. And so there's been great movement around CASACs being able to support other people in their recovery journey, whatever that may look like for them. So like I mentioned, we have RNs. We do have care coordination. So Bridges to Care is a team that I used to be the supervisor for. And so our Bridges to Care team is really just case management services, but like short-term intentional support, right? If people need help with filling out HRA applications or Social Security things, really kind of getting them connected to the appropriate people who can help them in applying for specific benefits. We also have social workers on the team who provide like crisis support, post-hospitalization support. And we also have peers on that team who also provide support around clients in their recovery journey. So whether it be mental health and adjusting to being back in the community, or it could also be clients who have a substance use history, right? How do we get them in a space that, you know, they are comfortable, whether it be outpatient, inpatient, any kind of harm reduction models. Our peers are great. I mean, all of our staff are great, but our peers are really like great at really connecting now in on a personal level. So that's a lot of what we are doing and how we're utilizing the new grant. Part of the grant is also because of the community input is that we're establishing a community advisory board. So we would encourage anyone and everyone who would be interested in really kind of talking about what the community feels that they need from our mental health providers, right? I remember, I think Tanisha last week talked about having providers who are reflective of the community that they're serving, and that often it can be a challenge. So that's definitely a conversation that we would love to bring up, and how to incorporate that in our hiring models, in our representation and population. We want to be able to be reflective of the communities that we're serving. So yes, anyone who's involved in the community board, again, I will share my contact information afterwards. We can connect and we can establish that. We hope to have our first community advisory board meeting February 29th, because it's a leap year. So if anyone has any recommendations, or anyone that might be expressed interest, the idea is that we're going to meet quarterly. There might be changing that to monthly, but bare minimum quarterly, if not maybe every other month, to make sure we not only are receiving the input, but we are giving back the feedback of what's happening in our spaces. Also, last but not least, the veteran care. So part of our grant is also to include veteran and veteran work into mental health services. Not everyone goes to the VA for a whole host of reasons. And so we want to make sure that our veterans are taken care of on a mental health basis, because as we might know, mental health services for people who've been through war, it's a little bit different. The PTSD model is very different for civilians than it is for people who've been through the military. So making sure we connect them to the appropriate services. Other than that, I mean, the SUD team is another big piece that we want to make sure that we inform everyone that, because we're not functioning in silos anymore, we want to be able to provide that level of support, whether it be connecting them to an Odyssey house, or maybe like having our peers take them there, because it's one thing to say, I want to work on a specific vice that people may have. It's another thing to have someone hold your hand through that process. So as my little one-sheeter says, the statistics for New York City, especially around the COVID era, like 2020 was really impacted a lot of people on numerous levels, but on a substance use standpoint, it increased about 79% since the onset of COVID. And so we really want to start tackling that that aspect of substance use and mental health and all of that jazz. So, and our goal is to really kind of have a SUD team, have a health monitoring team, really have this holistic idea of care, and want to be able to service the community, but also kind of hear from you guys. Are we going in the right direction? Is this something that we need to change based off the community needs? And I will say, I don't live in Community Board 12 anymore. I used to. I used to live literally around the corner from the clinic. This community board is near and dear to my heart. So I was thrilled to start this journey in a combination of both a community that I hold near and dear and the work in mental health that I actually hold very close to my heart, being in the field for almost 15 years. So I hope this was as quick and as summarized as I could possibly do, but I can absolutely share this with everyone else after the meeting. And if anyone has any questions, I'm here and I'm available.
Awesome. Thank you, Norma. Very helpful. Yes, please do share. I think a couple things come to mind, and then I'll kind of open it up to committee members as well for feedback and questions. One, our Health and Environment Committee. They meet, unfortunately, at the same time that we do, so they're meeting right now. But would strongly encourage you, and I'm happy to put you in touch with them. I'm sure they would appreciate kind of a presentation very similar to what you just did here this evening. They focus quite a lot on mental health as well, recognizing the needs in our community. And so one, it's kind of very welcome news that the Jewish Family Services Board is kind of here in our community doing work and quite holistic. I think that's the bit that I like quite a bit, that's quite holistic. It's not just, here's a short-term intervention, but actually thinking about the whole picture. And that's very important. The other thing is on the support for veterans. A couple of months ago, maybe a little bit longer than that, but we had a presentation from the New York City Office on Veteran Affairs. Happy to connect you with them. Maybe I know that they often kind of send out resources and things of that nature. Maybe it's, kind of linking in and adding your organization onto the list of resources that veterans can seek if they need that support. So I'll kind of follow up with you separately on those bits. Tanisha, over to you.
Well, hello. Norma, thank you so much. We are always in the business of looking for good, culturally responsive and relevant mental health services in our community. So I am very excited to hear about all of this great work that you are doing. I'm not going to take up too much time online. Hopefully we can connect offline. But I had one question. So you said that you have services for early learning and for children on the spectrum. Could you just elaborate a little bit on what those services look like?
Sure. So we have an early childhood treatment center or clinic, primarily in the Harlem location, has a more robust program than we would in the Inwood location. And so sometimes when you have parents who may be going to their doctor's office and say, hey, like either they have history or, they've done their own research, is like something is not quite normal, right? My kid is not hitting milestones the way they should. Or like my kid is not talking, like what do I do? And I think our early childhood team, they really just not just work on treating the child, right? We have clinicians who may help them with connecting them to OT, PT, speech, like things, services of that nature, but also like working with the mom to kind of really address, or I'm not saying mom, but like parent overall, it could be dad, it could be a grandma. Just working with the parent to really figure out how can we support the parent in conjunction with the child and making sure the child's needs are met. So our early childhood program, they may be able to assess, hey, yep, it looks like according to our diagnosis that your kid may be struggling with autism. This is all the services we recommend that we can help you get you connected to the appropriate services for that child. We ourselves don't necessarily, we have kids who have autism on or are on the spectrum in our services for any kind of therapy that they may benefit from. But also, we also understand that we can't be anything and everything for everybody. So if we say, listen, we can do our best we can in this clinical setting, but he may need more social treatment or more social support in another program, we'd be able to connect them to those programs, if that makes sense. And I hope I answered your
Yeah,
question.
it does. But like in a timely fashion, because I find that a lot of organizations that do this kind of work, yes, they can refer their clients to other services, but that doesn't mean that the clients are going to get the services in a timely fashion. And my follow-up question is, how do you take referrals? Or how, so, do you take referrals? Do you work with people in the community? Do you work with community-based organizations, that have identified people, or that people come to them and they need services? Are you a place that, would work with, people on the street where they could refer clients to you that are in need of these services?
So I'll answer the first question. So yes, we understand that there's a delay across the board when it comes to social services. Oh, believe me, I know, right? And so we do our best within limits to be able to provide support. Intakes usually they happen within the week of sending the referral. And again, I can add our one call units number to the flyer as well, so you guys can have that. And so we have this centralized unit that takes in all of our referrals, and will send the referral to the appropriate clinic based off of location and needs, right? I will say, because it is so challenging to make sure people get the appropriate level of services, just because we refer doesn't mean that we drop you, right? What our modality that I can attest, because my team has done it in the past, is we're going to keep working with you until you make that first appointment. So even if that first appointment is 6 months down the road, because we can't control the speed in which the other provider can accept your case, but we won't let you fall, right? We will be able to provide that level of service and support until that. I always tell my staff, we can't drop it at intake. We have to go make sure they go to intake and make sure they go to that first appointment, right? Because things get lost in translation, things can get lost in the sauce, and we don't want people to lose care because of a disconnect. We want to make sure that the families, the kids, their services are established before we take the step back, because we also have to be mindful of insurances, right? We can't bill for the same level of service. So we want to make sure that, you're connected, you're good, you have no issues, right? Because sometimes even if you referred or assigned, there might be a disconnect there, right? This might not be the best clinician for the services that you need, or the relationship and the rapport is not there. How we can advocate on your behalf to make sure you have support there. And we have parent advocates and child advocates, and in conjunction in that ECTC modality. So we really have people who are there to advocate for the family as a whole. Sorry, can you repeat the second question?
Referrals.
Referrals. Okay. Yeah. So we receive referrals from anybody and everybody. Because we have an intake process that is a little bit more amendable. We have telehealth, we have in person. I will send out the flyer, and I'll make sure that our one call number is there. And we're in the process, right? In this grant, our real challenge is making sure that stakeholders and our community stakeholders, and specifically, know that we're doing this so we can help people from the community. So we're in that process of establishing those stakeholders lists, really getting the message out there, because, information is power. So we need to make sure that we communicate to the bigger entities at large. So some of the organizations we are doing is that we are looking at CBOs, we are looking at hospitals, we're looking at FQHCs, we're looking at bigger entities that may benefit from this level of support, and establishing those relationships, right? If we have a client who needs outpatient substance use, we don't have that, but we need to make sure that you get that. So making sure we have those kind of what we call linkages agreements to specific locations, right? And vice versa. If someone is coming out of the hospital and they need therapy, and they're in they're in the community district, they can refer to us and we can accept the case, right? So that's something that's part of the grant that's really emphasized, is establishing more community connectiveness. So definitely something we're working on.
Thank you, Norma. I think the other thing I'll add, that I really kind of appreciate the community-centered approach that the organization is taking with the Community Advisory Board. And so I'll follow up with you on that, because I'm sure there's probably interest even within our own committee, but also kind of the wider community board, to participate and kind of get involved in some of that. And I see Tanisha shaking her head.
Well, I honestly was inspired because when Tanisha talked about some of the challenges within the mental health services, I said, this is perfect, right? Because this is exactly what the intentionality of this grant of Jewish Board in this space right now. So absolutely, I will be able to share that information.
Great,
I would
please do.
definitely say, I'm sorry, Mary. And
Yep,
I
go
would
ahead,
just,
Tanisha, and then
I
over to
would just,
Marshall.
I would just definitely say that you came to the right place, because I find that most of my peoples on this community board, like, we are really rooted in our in our community. So I'm sure you'll be hearing from a few of us.
Beautiful.
Marshall?
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. um, Good evening, Norma. I was just wondering, are you involved in like homeless outreach? And that suggests you would have some partners uh for that. So if maybe you could amplify what you're doing in that area, and I'll land my plane right here. Thank you.
So yes, definitely homelessness. I mean, we all know the housing crisis in New York City. As long as I've been a social worker, which again is like almost like 15 years, it's housing has always been an issue in New York City. You know, finite amount of space, finite amount of air. We're really struggling. And then in conjunction with a lot of the administrative changes that are happening in New York City as a whole, we're really feeling it, right? So one of the bigger entities we're trying to connect with is BRC. They are known for their homelessness outreach, really connecting with their leadership to really get their input of how we can support a lot of clients who may be who may be experiencing homelessness. And as well as Jewish Board overall has a lot of supportive housing units, right? And supportive housing is a very lengthy process. We just had a meeting today about like, we have all these beds available, but we need people to apply, but the application process is so hard. So how in the CCBHC are we making for people, right? We can't say we're in a housing crunch and then make the process to obtain said housing so challenging. So supportive housing really focuses on the community that we serve. So a lot of it's severe and persistent mental illness and people with a history of substance use. But really kind of figuring out like, how can we make this process easier, right? What department can really help people who may be experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness and getting their application done, helping them facilitate the intake process and all the things that come with supportive housing. And then, I mean, once we get that done, which, you know, that's so easy, then we can then really refer to ourselves because we have the units available, right? We have more units available in the Harlem location and more in the Bronx. And I know because I work with them directly, but we have so many supportive houses, scattered sites, things of that nature, that with the CCBHC, we're getting the message out and establishing that connection to some of these agencies that are known for their homelessness outreach. It makes our jobs a lot easier. And then we are housing people, which is exactly what we need to do.
Thank you, Norma. We've been in touch with BRC, so also happy to connect you if you need some support on that. But Jay, sounds like you have a question.
Yeah, I just had, do you work with the Overdose Prevention Center in Washington Heights?
No, I mean, it's on our list of stakeholders to reach out to because our OASIS program has really been taking off in Brooklyn because they just recently obtained their licensure and there's a lot more movement out in Brooklyn. For us, right, we understand that not every facility, ours included, may not be amendable to a lot of substance use programs. Like we won't be able to have an MMTP program in the space that we're allocated right now. But if you know of any specific agencies or connection in those spaces, I would gladly take that back to the team so we can start establishing that care because I know there's a lot in Manhattan, but we don't know all of them. So if you have any support there, I'd greatly appreciate it.
I think they've been around for a while and they focus on substance use, homeless population. And they might have a breadth of services they're already connected to because they do try to connect some of these folks to recovery services or any other type of services that they need. And I know the CEO, so I'm happy to make that connection.
Absolutely. I'd greatly appreciate that as well, especially because if you have a population that meets all the criteria for supportive housing, but they still need the mental assessments, right? They still need psychiatrics and psychosocials. We can provide that, right? We can provide not only the treatment, but all the evaluations that are necessary to get a lot of their clientele housed. So absolutely, if you can share that information, I greatly appreciate it.
I'll connect you both. Awesome. Any questions from anyone else here? No?
Yeah, I have a
Yeah,
question.
Michelle, please.
Yeah, so if can anybody in the community board access services, anybody in the community access services at the Jewish board? I know I had a friend who was looking for like a therapist and she was really struggling and she kind of had issues because her insurance didn't allow her to access many providers, and those providers had huge wait lists, and she wasn't really able to get an appointment. So what does that look like for somebody who's just trying to find a therapist but may not have insurance, or whose insurance may not be accepted by many therapists?
So that is a phenomenal question, because that's historically access to care is one of the biggest barriers that we're trying to, or biggest things that we're trying to fill, right? And so I get it. We worked in mental health services, and a lot of them have to go through insurance, and whether this provider is accepted or your plan is accepted or whatever, it runs the gamut. With the CCBHC though, part of the grant is that we can't turn down anyone. We have to, regardless of your insurance, regardless of your immigration status, regardless of any of those things, part of the grant is that we have to be accessible to anyone and everyone. So I hope that answers your question, because I know that's insurance is a big barrier to a lot of things. And so because we received this new grant, it really opens up our population to accept a lot of different walks of life.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And so because you are open to anybody who needs mental health services, what does that look like in terms of wait times, right? Like, are there some specialties or some, people with certain diagnoses where they have to wait a lot longer than others, versus somebody who's just looking for just like a traditional talk therapist?
Well, I will be quite honest. COVID did a number on everyone and anyone, right? And so it really has been a challenge to get people connected in a timely fashion. I will say I guess was it early last year, what we had to do, because we realized we had a wait list that we could not even catch up with, is that we had to stop taking referrals at some point. This was before the grant was instituted. So we had to stop. We had to really kind of assign the people that we already had waiting, getting them assigned, hiring more staff, hiring more clinicians, both on a fee-for-service model or a salary model. Also, language is important. I'm no stranger to Washington Heights and Inwood area. Spanish is a big deal. So we really had to kind of reconceptualize, okay, like we can't just have people waiting on wait lines for forever. So what do? So we keep a more mindful approach to our intake processes. In the moment that it gets too much, or we don't have enough clinicians to assign clients, we have to close our intakes. It could be for a week, it could be for 2 weeks, it could be for a couple of months, but really kind of keep the eye on the prize of making sure that all the clients that we have that complete intakes, we are assigning them in a more timely fashion. I wouldn't say one diagnosis on one population is harder to place than the other. All of our clinicians are trained we've all gone to social work school, so a lot of them have some modalities that they're more comfortable with. Also, part of this grant is that we're increasing our access to things like EMDR, which is a new treatment modality that not everyone is trained to do, but it's proven to be very effective, especially for people who struggle, I believe, with like anxiety and depression, but it can also do support in other diagnoses. So we don't have we do have when we do an intake, we do have people who are identified as high risk, primarily because of their history. So we are responsible for assigning them in a quicker fashion. But because we have this Bridges to Care team, right, we have people who are ready and willing to take the case as soon as they come in, especially if they're identified as a high-risk client, right? Risk of endangering themselves and other people. We have those abilities to assess, and we assign them quicker because they run the risk of going to the hospital or hurting themselves. So that's probably the priority, but otherwise there's no other like priority ways of diagnosing like schizophrenia versus a person with depression. Everyone's going to get assigned as long as we have an accurate history.
Cool. Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah.
Do we have any final committee questions? No? Okay. I do want to note, Norma, that there is a question in the chat from one of our residents, Michael. And I'll just kind of read it out loud here. Are you familiar with low barrier permanent housing for homeless people in the shelters and on the street? They must be referred by SOS, ACT, or IMT teams. Same day housing with the referral.
I am familiar, especially on the ACT side. We don't have I don't think we get referrals from SOS. And we do get IMT referrals. So we are familiar with them, but it's less frequent. And because our ACT team goes through SPOA and CSPOA, they have their own referral processes that's different than the standard clinic. So if a person is being identified as one of these three teams, I know we have an ACT for sure. I think we just have relationships with the other two.
Great. Thank you, Norma. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We'll be in touch. There's clearly a couple of connections that we have to make. Do send us that one pager, because that's also something that we can be, kind of share in the wider kind of listserv in the community board resource, document that we have. I think it would also be great if your time allows maybe a short presentation during the public session at the general meeting that we have, which is the last Tuesday of every month. And I can kind of send you more details on how to do that and kind of sign up for that. But again, thank you for taking the time, and we look forward to working with you.
Thank you as well. And thank you everyone for allowing me to present.
Great. So now I'm going to move back up on the agenda. I believe Marquise is now here. Hi, Marquise. How are you? Good evening to you.
Good evening.
Thank you so much. So Marquise Jenkins is joining us from Residents to Preserve Public Housing. A thank you to Tanisha for making the connection. And with that, Marquise, I'll turn it over to you. I'm not sure if you'd like to share your screen or anything. It's fine if you don't. Over to you.
Thank you. I would like to share screen. I'll show a couple of slides to kind of help tell a story that I'm telling. How much time do I have?
About 10 minutes.
Okay, perfect. All right, I'll get through the 10 minutes. I'm going to share my screen now. Again, so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Marquise Jenkins, and I'm a proud part of public housing. Me and my 9 siblings and endless numbers of nieces and nephews grew up in public housing, and it's my passion. And throughout my 20-year career as a public housing organizer, public housing has been at the forefront of my career. And so this is why I got involved. This is volunteer work now, and the entire group is volunteer. So the Residents to Preserve Public Housing is a citywide resident-led group that also includes residents from not just Citywide Council of Presidents. We aim to preserve public housing by advocating for adequate funding, adequate repairs, and of course, increasing resident decision-making authority. To Preserve Public Housing started in 2018 with the introduction of the Public Housing Preservation Trust. When that legislation was first introduced, the residents were concerned, they were nervous, they didn't know what to do. And of course, such an ambitious plan was introduced during the height of COVID. So in frantic, residents wanted to sort of have a space where they can talk about this, digest this, and learn about it, and then figure out how they were going to respond. And that was the creation of the Residents to Preserve Public Housing. But taking a step back, and looking at the issues that are plaguing public housing. Public housing has two major issues. The first is that it has a management crisis. Our housing authority has poor management going so far back that I can't even pinpoint exactly where they started to screw up. And so the second piece is funding. And what I have up here is a chart that shows sort of how the federal government allocated money back in 19. Let me zoom this
Marquise,
in
can
a
you
little.
click slideshow so it actually zooms in?
Yeah, let me see if that works, because sometimes it doesn't. But let me see.
Oh, awesome.
There
So
we
what you see here is the funding that the federal government allocated towards housing, right? Affordable housing, all forms of affordable housing. At the height in 1978, the government spent 1.41% of its budget. The federal government spent 1.41% of its budget on housing. And we fast forward all the way to 2018, and you see that there's a drastic drop in the amount of money that the government is giving to affordable housing. So the question is, did the government get less money? What did they do with the money that they stopped giving to affordable housing? And you can see here in my next slide, you can see that the gray represents the downshift and the amount of money that the federal government is giving to public housing. And the orange line represents the amount of tax breaks that the government is giving to homeowners, investors, and wealthy buyers. So there's been a shift in the government's priority. And we always like to start there because so many residents are constantly being told there's not enough money, when the reality is the priorities have shifted for the federal government. And it's our responsibility to shift that priority back. Nonetheless, we have this deficit that the Housing Authority is quoting to be $78 billion over a 20-year period. So the question is, how is the government trying to figure out how they're going to get that $78 billion? And so they came up with a series of programs. I'm gonna take it out of slideshow mode just so that I can skip ahead. So the Housing Authority came up primarily with these different schemes, right? RAD, PAC, and the Public Housing Preservation Trust. So the RAD PAC program started during the Obama administration. And in a nutshell, what it does is it allows the Housing Authority to take certain developments and hand them over to private developers. In turn, those private developers change the funding source from Section 9 public housing to Section 8. And then they also take out mortgages on the property so that they can bring in additional funding to pay for the necessary repairs that need to be paid. The scary part is they're taking out a mortgage, and just like any other mortgage, if you don't pay that money back, then we risk properties going into foreclosure. And with NYCHA's track record of not being well with the money, we don't trust them. And so we definitely don't trust private landlords to do what needs to be done to make sure that they're paying back loans and they're staying on top of those loans. We simply can't risk them screwing up that, because if they screw up, then we basically go into foreclosure, and that'll be the first time public housing actually is in the full control over the private sector. So the federal government gave our housing authority the ability to do that to 62,000 units. So to put that in context, New York City is the largest public housing authority in the country. We have 176,000 units. So about a third of our units can be converted into the RAD PAC program. Now, the housing, there was so many issues that stemmed from the first conversion that was at Ocean Bay. Ocean Bay had record numbers of evictions. There was still lead and mold and all types of issues that still played out. And so with every iteration, they tried to address the challenges that they faced in the last RAD conversion that they've done. So in 2019, the Housing Authority came out with another scheme, which is similar to RAD PAC, right? The difference is in RAD and PAC, we have a private developer. In the trust, the Housing Authority wanted to be able to do exactly what private developers are doing under RAD PAC. So through state law, they created the Public Housing Preservation Trust. And it allows the Housing Authority or the Public Benefits Corporation to do exactly what the private landlords do, which is one, change the funding source from Section 9 to Section 8 funding, and two, take out mortgages on the property. Again, same fear here that the property can go into foreclosure. The Residents Who Preserve Public Housing was able to stop this legislation from passing in 2021. And then Julia Salazar came back with the bill with some significant changes. Noted that we were still not in favor, but some of the changes included a voting feature, which allowed residents to vote and determine if they wanted the trust to come to their development or not. We had challenges with the democratic process for voting. Only 20% of the heads of households are required to participate in order for the vote to be legit. The second challenge we had was that they added RAD PAC to the amount of choices that residents has, which basically increases the odds that a resident is going to choose a Section 8 conversion. So these are the two programs that the Housing Authority have been moving aggressively with, and we want to keep it to Section 9. Of course, I stress to everyone that we're not simply just fighting for the buildings, we're fighting for everything that comes under Section 9. And so with that, RPPH has been working on a number of fronts because we know that in order to stop these programs from moving forward, we have to get the adequate funding that we need from government. So we organize lobby trips to go up to Albany every year during the legislative and budget cycle. We're in the process now of developing our budget demands, which include capital operating dollars, as well as a pilot fund program so that residents can begin to engage in the resident management process. And then finally, with the Public Housing Preservation Trust, we've come up with a set of amendments that we want to sort of have implemented and passed as law. These amendments address some of the most harmful aspects of the trust. And I'm happy to share those amendments with you and see if we can get you guys to support us in getting those amendments placed on the actual Public Housing Preservation Trust Act. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and see if there are some questions, and forgive me if I went over time.
Thank you, Marquise. No, you did not go over time. You were just right on time, so perfect. First question, I guess, can you share the slides? Because there's clearly a lot of information there. And would certainly appreciate kind of having a chance to actually like look at it and kind of, take it in. And I know obviously it's quite hard to do that in kind of the short amount of time that we have. So that would kind of be my first thing. But I'll open it up for questions to the committee on your presentation.
I do have a question. Thank you so much for your presentation. I was wondering, how is the decision made between going the RAD PAC route or the trust route? Is that something that the residents decide, or is there some other like external factor that influences that?
Right. So this is an area where NYCHA was being what's the word I'm looking for? Conniving doesn't quite capture it, but that's the word that comes to mind. Because there's two answers to this question. When it comes to RAD PAC, there is no voting. So the Housing Authority can go up to any development and say, we want to put you in the RAD and PAC program. Right? Because the government, the federal government, the Obama administration created the RAD PAC program, and that's a federal program all over. The Public Housing Preservation Trust is a New York State law, and it only applies to New York. But where they got tricky was if the housing authority approaches a development to say, we think you would be good for the trust, then there is a voting process. And when they get to vote, they get to vote on RAD PAC, the trust, or remaining in Section 9. So the conniving piece here is they can go and do RAD to you without even having to vote. So you can go to a voting process and then you can vote to stay Section 9 and not do any of the conversion. And then who's to say NYCHA won't come back a year and say, you know what, we're going to put you through the RAD anyway.
Thank you.
Richard?
Thank you very much. Of the things you talked about, I'd like to take a minute and focus on the management issues. I realize that's just one piece of the presentation. I think my general take, and I'm more than glad to hear disagreement from it, is that public management suffers from the not very nimble responses of a bureaucracy. And property management takes much more than 9 to 5 response. And there may be some additional issues there. Private sector management has a little more nimbleness, but it has private sector profit-driven values. And I'm wondering, in general, how you would comment on what you see as the kind of management plans we should be moving to. That's the thing that strikes me as the current weakness in Section 9, in the Section 9 approach. Management,
So, I mean, I'll answer this question with our vision, because I don't think that we're ready for the vision yet, but I think it helps you understand sort of where we're trying to get to. Ideally, we want residents in full control in managing their own developments. And public housing is the only housing program that gives residents the ability to take over management. They can take over management of one operation, like doing all the painting at the development, or they can take over full control over their development. We have an example in New Orleans where the tenant association president took full control over the development. It's called Gus Homes. And what we've learned is that that is one of the most successfully ran housing authorities in the country. Why? Because the priority is different, right? These residents care more than anybody about the conditions of their homes. And the first thing that is different between the housing authority and the private sector is how they choose to spend their money. And so public housing residents, if given the training and resources and legal counsel that they need, they will certainly do a much better job in figuring out where's the best place to put the money. For example, here in New York, we have so many managers. We have 5 managers managing 2 people. The type of bureaucracy that exists is ridiculous, and they don't go out of their way to hire public housing residents. And if they went out of their way to hire public housing residents, then that in itself increases the amount of income that comes to public housing, because public housing charges 30% of your income. And so if a resident's income goes up, then the amount of rent that they pay also goes up. However, even though resident management is the long-term vision, we don't want to give developments over to residents that have $2 billion needs and tell them to fix it. So in the immediate time, we have to push for more oversight. We are calling on the state legislature to build an independent audit team to do yearly audits on the housing authority to ensure that they're managing the monies properly. We're calling on the training so that we can start to prepare residents for resident management. And we're calling for adequate funding to get back to the funding levels that we had from the 1930s to the 1970s.
Incredible appreciation for that response. And maybe the only comment would be that realizing that a transitional time, the transitional period is not going to be a short period. I think I'd suggest exploring whether there's some options with nonprofit management companies, short term, shorter term. But-
Yeah, I mean, and that's another area where the Housing Authority purposely left nonprofits out. When they came up with the RFPs or whatever they call the sort of proposal process, they made it so that anyone who applied to be a developer and under the RAD program had to manage a certain number of units. And most nonprofits don't have the same amount of units as some of sort of the bigger corporations like Wavecrest. So by default, all of those nonprofits were left out of the process. And when you look at how RAD is operated in other states, they actually do utilize nonprofit organizations to take over. And that, of course, would be more profitable than a for-profit organization. And the last thing I'll say is, like, we all know the goal is not to make public housing better for residents, is to effectively end the program. And you can look at what's happening at Fulton and Elliott Chelsea Houses as a prime example of what they really want to do with public housing, and that is to demolish it and use their land to build market rate housing on it.
Please don't go ahead.
Oh, just very briefly, I'm aware, not in depth, of a PACT RAD organization that's partly in Washington, has properties partly in Washington Heights and partly immediately to the south in Harlem. And I thought that there were some nonprofit partners in that effort, you know, including one nonprofit has a very good reputation in Washington Heights and Inwood. And I'm just, maybe that's a comment more than it is a question.
Yeah, I mean, there's not just trying a handful of different models, but the big ones are the two that I described. They're also doing something called infill, and there's a comprehensive modernization that's happening at St. Nicholas Houses. That's a different model. I think that's a more profitable model. So there are different models that not just trying out, but their dominant models are the ones that I described.
Thank you very much.
If I can, thank you, Richard. And you have a point? This is really quick.
Statement.
Yeah, no, go ahead, and then I'll make my point, and then Tanisha.
Okay. For your when you said, you know, to open up and audit them, my understanding is because of the trust, they are now they can now be audited by the authority's budget office, headed by a man named Jeff Pearlman. He's a very smart man I've met. But under the RAD and PACT and NYCHA itself, the authority's office was never allowed to audit them. Now, because of the trust, they can. I just want to let you know that.
Right. I mean, when it comes to the trust, we have bigger fish to fry, so to speak. What we're most fearful of is the lending aspect. The trust has the ability to take on now up to $10 billion worth of debt. And the city nor the state came in and was like, we'll guarantee if the private company, if the trust defaults on the loan, we'll step in and pay that loan. So that loan right there is probably the scariest part. And they're also relying on what's known as tenant protection vouchers, which is a different type of project-based voucher. It is a voucher that is used when apartments are classified as obsolescence or inhabitable. And so in order to qualify for those vouchers, an inspection is supposed to take place. Now, HUD has the right to waive that inspection process, but an inspection must take place. So they would, in theory, have to inspect 25,000 units in order to qualify for those vouchers. And we just don't know how many vouchers NYCHA currently has, or how many vouchers HUD has promised to give to the Public Housing Preservation Trust. And so the fear is that before they get those vouchers, that they will start borrowing money. And if they start borrowing money and they don't get those vouchers, then they don't have a way to pay those dollars back.
Mm. Thank you, Marquise. Tanisha, over to you.
Thank you so much, sir. We really appreciate you. But could you please tell us the difference between Section 8 and Section 9?
Mm.
Absolutely. There's some real differences between the two programs. Section 8 was created in 1974, and I believe Section 8 was the first attack that the private sector launched on public housing. Public housing, when it was first created, for the first time in history, right, our government was building better housing than the private sector. And it was direct competition. So the private sector, through their lobbying, figured out a way to tap into the government dollars. And so they were able to convince the government to create the Section 8 program, which allowed individuals to get a voucher and move into private housing. And so it was created specifically for the private sector, albeit our housing authority manages the vast majority of Section 8 in New York City, but it was created to sort of shift funding to the public sector. Then we have something called the 964 Rules and Regulations. And resident management is something that fits into those rules and regulations. That is a Bible. That gives residents all the rights and protections that no other resident in this city has. The right to organize, the right to have funding to support that organizing, the right to have space to do that organizing. I mean, if the housing authority can't provide them with adequate space, then they have to look at an apartment and give residents an actual apartment to run tenant association business, secession rights. The list goes on. Those rights, again, they don't exist under Section 8. Some things are shifting now, but one other major difference was income. In public housing, your income can keep going up and you will still qualify for the subsidy. You basically paid a ceiling rent. Whereas in Section 8, once your income reaches a certain level, you no longer qualify for that subsidy. The Housing Authority recognized that particular difference. And so again, under the Obama administration, they created a program called HOTMA, HOTMA. And what they're starting to do now is they're starting to phase the higher income residents in public housing. They're starting to kick them out or tell them they have to pay a fair market value for their apartment. So for the first time, public housing can charge a fair market value for rent. So some of the rules and policies are different, and the motivation for the program is different. Those are like some of the more sort of polarizing differences, but there are some sort of smaller things that you can sort of pick up between the two.
Thank you, Marquise. Can I just check if there's any final questions? None. Okay. Thank you so much for taking the time to present to us. Thank you. Thank you. Please send, if you wouldn't mind sharing the presentation, because then I can share with the rest of the committee and we can kind of review in more detail. But also I think helpful to learn a little bit more, as you mentioned, you talked about some like advocacy trips that your organization is working on. Just knowing what that timeline is and kind of your engagement as it relates to the amendments. Kind of keep us posted on all of that, and would certainly welcome you to come back to the committee in future meetings. So thank you, Marquise. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good evening, and you're welcome to stay on if you'd like.
It's okay. I just moved into a new place, so I'm like juggling and assembling furniture. So I'm gonna help out. But thank you so much.
Thank you, and good luck in your new place.
Thank you.
Great. All right, so then we'll now move on to, we have kind of monthly updates from elected representatives on housing and human services, and then we have updates from CBOs, and then kind of old business, which kind of where we have committee priorities. I do know that we have Jamila on the line from Carmen de la Rosa's office. So if it's okay, I'll turn it over to Jamila for just really quick, like 5 minutes, maybe even 2-minute update on all of the things that the councilwoman is working on. And then Jamila, if it's okay, because I know we're going to talk about the resolution and hear some of the feedback on that. So if it's okay, maybe we just put that under committee priorities, because I think that'll probably be next anyway.
Yes. I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds good. I didn't expect to give an update. That's why I was like, whoa, I heard my name.
I'm sorry. I mean, it's fine. If you want, we can go next, and then, maybe at the next month, you can just give us an update. And obviously we'll hear one at the general meeting in a few weeks. So that's also fine as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's good. I know we're definitely for CB12 in terms of the housing company, we're focused on our end was for 4095 9th Avenue.
Yep.
So we could definitely just discuss that and keep going.
Sure. So if it's okay, because there's no other electeds on the line, and I also don't see any kind of other CBOs on the line. So we'll go straight to committee priorities, and I'm going to actually just pull up the email that I sent to everyone, because part of that is, let me just see where it's at. Oh, goodness. Some of the work that we've been working on. So so for the public, as a committee, we've tried to identify some of the work streams for the next couple of months for the committee. One, focusing just really quickly, for the record, on developments. And we identified what's kind of current and ongoing, but kind of new. So developments, obviously there's a lot of new and current and ongoing developments in our community. And so really working to identify the current status of, what's happening with them, who are the stakeholders, have they been involved with the community? We'll come to the new one time that I listed here, which is the presentation that we received from HPD back in December. So this is the 4095 9th Avenue site. As you know, they are in the process of kind of preparing the request for proposals with community input. And this kind of came out of the Inwood rezoning. With that, we also discussed during that meeting, if you recall, they had identified a series of, or wanted to table, but also to put together a visioning workshop, which both Jamila and I will update you all on. There's a little bit of work possibly around local law 78 and Inwood legal action, and possibly working with them to put on a workshop for the community to learn how to use the EDI, which is the tool that we had the presentation on. Just really quickly, then moving on to budget requests, we talked about kind of following up with city agencies for the annual kind of budget requests, so that we're not just kind of when September and October roll around trying to figure out where things are at, but actually doing that work now and having an ongoing conversation with them and holding them accountable, honestly. So that way they're actually following up on what they said they would do. We also agreed on kind of deep diving into an issue for a couple of months, because obviously the human service, there's so much in human services, and mental health was one of them. And we obviously had the presentation today from a Jewish Board of Family and Children's Services focus on mental health. And so there's kind of other work that we can do as a committee on that. The other thing is City of Housing. City of Yes Housing Opportunities. There's going to be quite a lot happening with that. So that's with the Department of City Planning. The timeline for that will be sometime in the spring, but they've begun to have a lot of public sessions. There was one earlier this week. Jamila, so from Carmen de la Rosa's office, Kathy, our chair, and Wayne from Land Use, and myself, we had a call with them earlier this week. We're going to try to bring them to the committee as well for a presentation so that people can ask questions. But then there will also be kind of an opportunity for when they kind of put the proposal to the city council, the text amendment later in the spring. And so engaging with them in that process, because it's citywide, and there'll be quite a number of changes that they're proposing to our area. Inwood rezoning follow-up. So kind of really, again, with DCP, but also thinking about, following up on the commitments that came out of that process. Obviously, some of them have been completed, some are ongoing. The Eliza is kind of ongoing, almost there, and those types of things. The Rent Guidelines Board. So every year, as you know, May, June is normally when the Rent Guidelines Board releases their, or they vote on the increase for rent stabilized apartments. So again, engaging in that process and making sure that what comes out of that is actually friendly. Knowing that in our community, we actually have quite a large number of rent stabilized apartments, so it heavily affects us quite a bit. And then the last two, just really quickly, just really thinking about legislative priorities. So because we kind of really run a spectrum of things that are happening, are we keeping track of things that are happening in city council and at the state level that relate to the remit of what we do? Are there things we should be supporting, advocating for, just keeping a better track of those things? And then lastly, I think just being responsive to the community. Obviously, things will come up, things will happen, and being able to continue to create a space where residents, organizations, elected, so on, can come and share those points. That was a lot. But if it's okay, Jamila, I'll now kind of turn it over to you so we can talk about 4095 9th Avenue and kind of where that's at. And then part of that discussion is, as you all recall, the desire for us as CB12 to put forward a resolution that kind of outlines the guidelines and the priorities of what we would like to see in new developments. I did share one with you all online. CB11 has done this actually in 2019, so we're a little bit behind the curve. But we're having a conversation with them tomorrow to kind of get their input and their feedback. And I know that Jamila and the team at Carmen de la Rosa's office that are, they'll be able to provide some input as well to really make it as strong as possible. We're not going to vote on it here this evening because we see it as being part of land use as well. And so it's actually going to come from the executive committee, as I mentioned before, but I think still helpful for you all to see kind of the draft where it stands right now. Jamila, over to you on 4095.
Okay. If it's loud in here, I apologize. I'm having dinner. Just want to be transparent about that. In terms of 4095, I'm very glad that I was able to meet with HPD and obviously Marielle and Catherine, the chair, to get some feedback on what HPD is doing. One of the biggest things that I can say proudly about the council member is that she's very adamant about having community input. And I love that because I'm the same way. So in terms of having anything come into our district, especially because rezoning was done before administration, we want to make sure that people are being informed of what's coming here and what are the discussions being had. Because obviously the point of agreements is a whole other document that is like, I'm gonna be honest, like 80 pages long, and it highlights all these different things, but not how it's gonna be brought into the community. So they stated that they want to have a community-wide event, which I'm gonna gladly help them with the space, trying to make sure that it's around the site, so that surrounding community can make sure that they come in and have a voice. So we're thinking of IS 52. I have to get back to him after I make the phone call to the principals. I'm gonna try, well, the custodians, I should say, to see if we can secure that space for sometime in March. They're having several outreach points. They're starting in the temporary Inwood Library and around the area. I'm sure many of you guys know, I know Tanisha knows because she has been a great partner for this. For the People's Assembly that we're having on February 10th, it's going to be at Washington Heights Academy on 204 and Sherman Avenue. I'm going to have them come out and table. So that event, we're hoping for 300 people. Hopefully that's the good number that we get. Hopefully not too much because the space is limited, but we're hoping that they can come table the event during the lunch period so that people can come up to them and have questions and give their feedback on the questionnaire that they have out so far, and also what they would like to see for the RFP. So that's in the process that we're in right now, which is a community outreach before that March deadline. I think he said March 7, 8, or 9 is what we're looking at. Marielle, you could confirm or deny that. Okay. Yep. So the goal is to get as much outreach out there before that, because that's going to be their big outreach event. So I think that will be like the end of it. But I'm sure if anything happens, if we feel like we need to be at another corner to touch a little bit more based on what we get, then we'll make that happen. So that's where we are right now. Just making sure the community understands what is RFP, what can be brought there. I know that, again, for the rezoning, they were thinking of a STEM center, which of course we're in support of, but we want to make sure that it's elevated and it's also touching the points of the community, because a lot of STEM centers are happening already within schools and other areas, programming, I should say. So we want to make sure it's touching other issues like workforce development, and stuff like that, because Carmen is the civil service and labor chair. So workforce is on the front of her mind. I'm building, people's capacity to learn how to build a resume, how to do interviews and stuff like that, but actually go out and get a job. So we're trying to see if we can move it towards that direction when it comes to the STEM center, but that's not finalized just yet. Obviously, the community has to share their input. And I hope you guys can hear me clearly.
Yep, we can.
Okay, good. So that's where we are right now. I don't think I missed anything, Marielle. Again, you could jump in and correct me. But moving forward, that's what we'll be focusing on. And then in terms of the reso, we did get to review it. The only thing that I wanted to make sure that we can discuss, whether that's here or just you and I offline, but make sure that the community board has an input, is it says in one of the bullet points, it says AMI of CB12's AMI or AMI of CB12. We got to make sure that we are very detailed in that sense of what AMI we want to bring to the district, because that percentage is very important in determining the rep, right? And it's obviously like we have different salaries in our district, but we know we're a low income district, so we want to make sure that conversation is happening.
Thank you, Jamila. Super helpful. Just one additional point on what you shared in regards to 4095. They've shared with us a list of the tabling events. So as Jamila mentioned, actually just today, they were at the temporary Inwood Library location. Next week, they're at, I think, the Washington Heights Library site and a couple of other bits of but they've also identified a list of community stakeholders that they're either going to flyer at or stop by as they're kind of engaging. And so please, as much as possible, I'll share the list with all of you, but also with Kathy and the staff, making sure that they haven't missed any. Are there key partners that maybe they've overlooked that they may not be aware of? Are there things that are happening between now and March? I think it's incredibly important, as Jamila said, we want to have as many people as possible at that March event. Because that March event, for them, that's where they're going to do a visioning workshop to actually draft what that RFP could look like. If you recall, and then that would also inform their study. There's a report that would then come out of that, that they would then produce. And so really important that we can bring as many people as possible to that March event, and that we're, getting people involved and aware. I wonder if there's a bit around inviting them again to have something, and us as a community board really making sure that it's loud and clear that they're here. This is an opportunity to ask questions, knowing a little bit more about the timeline. That's something we can also explore as well, to carve out time for that. I'm going to quickly,
Sorry, I have one
please,
clarifying question.
Please.
So the events that we were talking about, where there was tabling for community feedback, that the potential dates are March 7th, 8th, and 9th, and then the visioning workshop would be after that?
No. So thank you for asking. So the visioning workshop would either be March 7th, 8th, or 9th.
Oh, okay, those are the dates.
Correct,
Okay,
exactly.
got it.
So what they're doing between now and beginning of March are these tabling events and the flyering.
I see.
To say, this is happening, are you aware? Give us some input now, but also we're having this event in March. As Jamila said, we're trying to hopefully secure IS-52 as a location. And then they would run a workshop, with, again, some visioning workshop of some sort to get input in terms of what the request for a proposal should look like. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I also checked on their website, and they have a community questionnaire that you can fill out.
Yes.
Just like a Google form type of thing to just provide feedback.
Yes.
Now ahead of time.
Yes.
So obviously, also can participate in the other event.
That's exactly right. And so thank you, because that's something I forgot. They released that at the beginning of January, I think it was. And so that's also something we need to be promoting in case people cannot make that event. There are options to input online as well. And so that's something that we can do with the staff, but also making sure that community partners are aware and have access
Yeah.
to those links and what pages.
I like started it and you
Mhm.
don't have to live in the area. You can say like, oh, I like go to shops or
Oh, good.
businesses there. And so there's like a different options
That's
for
good to know.
for
We need to-
people. Yeah.
Super helpful. Thank you. Thank you. So I then just want to go quickly to the draft resolution that Jamila referred to. I will admit, I think, and I mentioned this before, it is very kind of generic because it's a draft and I'm not a housing expert. And so this is why this feedback is incredibly important. We certainly appreciate the feedback that the councilwoman has given us. Let me just share my screen. Looks like I can't. I don't know what's happening here. I'm not sure what's happening. It looks like I can't share my screen. But I will read it really quickly and make sure that you all have it. And again, noting that that CB11 has passed a similar resolution in 2019. That's a lot more detailed, and I think that's kind of probably the framework that we would want to shift this to. Also, it includes, to Jamila's question, an actual really great breakdown of AMI and what the specific range of what they need for CB11. And I would agree with Jamila and the team that we need to do something very similar in this one. I'm going to try again to see if I can share my screen. I'm not sure why I'm having
You can
issues with
attach it in the chat. Download it, move it in the chat. and we can do it here.
Hold on one second. Maybe it's because I was opening it up that way. Let's see. Maybe this will work. Okay. Sorry, I'm not good with tech at all. Yeah, maybe I do need to do it that way. Not sure. It's really weird. It's not letting me share my screen. Okay. I'm going to just quickly read it. So the title needs some fixing, but right now it just says standards for future housing developments. Obviously, it's very much a draft. Whereas recognizing astronomical rents, inflation, and among other challenges facing New Yorkers, and whereas Washington Heights and Inwood are experiencing an exponential growth of new developments to address the housing crisis, and whereas the Statement of Community and District Needs and Community Budget Request for fiscal year 2024 highlighted affordable housing as the top pressing issue facing Community Board 12, and whereas while the increase in housing units in Washington Heights and Inwood is a step to address the housing crisis, new developments must be equitable and meet the needs of existing residents of CB12, including the household median income of CB12, which is $52,052 as outlined in the Statement of Community and District Needs and Community Budget Request for fiscal year 2024. And whereas Local Law 78 of 2021 creates a framework to understand the impact of new developments in New York City and promotes the use of equitable development data tool and racial equity study to understand the impact developments, okay, that's a typo, have on housing affordability, displacement, and racial equity in our community. And whereas Community Board 12 has concerns regarding the equitability, accessibility, and impact of new developments, including potential displacement on existing residents and the landscape of the area, but also welcomes increased housing units to address the housing shortage now. Therefore, be it resolved, Manhattan Community Board 12 calls on the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development, private developers, and community organizations to actively engage with the community, including but not limited to meetings with Community Board 12, elected officials, and community stakeholders throughout the entirety of the development process. Prioritize 100% affordable housing developments that meet the AMI of CB12. And then Jamila, I have a follow-up question for you. Commit to X, so I just put X because I wasn't sure what's the appropriate number. Again, certainly welcome feedback of minority and women-owned businesses in the contracting processes per section 6-129 of the Administrative Code of the City of New York. Conduct a racial equity impact study following Local Law 78 of 2021 for all new developments in Washington Heights and Inwood. Obviously, there's a lot there, but I also didn't want to get so specific that it kind of cuts things out. But I do think and would certainly agree with Jamila that we do need to be specific, particularly on the AMI bit. That I think we definitely need to be specific on and would welcome feedback on it. Jamila, in terms of the AMI bit, where are you where's the office seeing that? Is it in the fourth whereas or in the be it resolved?
Right here. I think it was the second bullet point towards the end. Be resolved.
Okay, because that's where I mentioned it. Okay, that's,
Yeah,
yeah, I think that's more than, yeah, I think that's more than appropriate. Thank you.
Yep.
So I'll share this, but again, we'll kind of present this to the executive committee. And just, I did also share with you all the resolution that CB 11 passed in 2019. And it kind of starts with a very similar thing, recognizing rapid rent increases, low income and special needs housing in Community District 11. It talks a little bit about, it encourages future housing proposals, but, that really needs to ensure that it's affordable. And they actually include a table, like in their resolved, they have one income and rent schedule where they talk about extremely low income, very low income, moderate, and middle. And they include a table there with those numbers. They also talk a little bit about the development on publicly owned sites, development on privately owned sites. So maybe there's also a bit about us splitting it out as well, because obviously there's different kind of regulations for both. They also talk about, which I think is really good, condominiums and co-ops. So I know there's also a lot, and I know this is something that the council members also working towards, including encouraging opportunities for home ownership and apartment ownership. Like, we should certainly encourage that as well. There's a lot here around kind of design elements, which I really like, including things about making sure that units are accessible. There's stuff on density and zoning, family and age-friendly design. Like, it's really good. So again, there's a meeting with them tomorrow, and we'll kind of dig in a little bit and kind of hopefully be able to learn from them and see what we can kind of use to strengthen the draft as it is.
Forgive me for missing something there, but you made a reference to a meeting around age-friendly design. Who's that meeting with?
So not a meeting, but the age-friendly design, the age-friendly design is what CB 11 has put into the resolution that they passed in 2019, and they titled it Affordable Housing Development Guidelines. The meeting that I have is with CB 11 tomorrow.
Cool.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
Sure, I have a question about
Please.
the
Mary was fine, by the way. Go ahead.
I am a little confused about the data. Is it specific to CB 11 in their reso? Because it doesn't reference like whether this data is all of New York City, of Manhattan, of CB 11, of Harlem. Like, I guess I'm just confused where the data is from and what argument is made off of that data.
So I see here how they have it listed. Okay. Therefore, be it resolved, Manhattan Community Board 12 will give priority to those proposals which seek community board approval and meet the following guidelines. So the income and rent schedule. Income requirements are based on the area median income of $96,100 for a family of 3 in 2019. But it looks like they pulled this chart from HPD's 2018 website here.
But what area is it referring to? Or maybe I'm missing that.
Well, it says here, so they have the chart. And then here, if you look at the bottom where it says development on publicly owned sites, it says here that they're calling for target 100% rent income restricted development with deep affordability at a variety of low and moderate income rent levels in perpetuity. And so you'll see here how they have it broken down by extremely low income, very low income, low income. And then it looks like they also do the same for privately owned sites, where they're saying here that if it's a privately owned site, or at least that's what they're calling for. Let me see. 50% should be given for affordable units. At least 30% of the residential units should be affordable at the average of 60% AMI.
Okay, got it. So they're using it to basically argue for what percentage of units should be made available at what income levels.
That's what I understand, exactly. And I'm going to get more clarity tomorrow, but yes, that's what I gather from it.
And yeah, this data, I assume, is specific to CB11, but it's not clear from like the citation to me that it's CB11's data. Versus like, you know, we would probably want data for CB12.
So my understanding, yeah, I agree with you. My understanding of this table is for all of New York City.
Oh, I see. Right,
Yes.
but that would be actually different than the breakdown in CB12, right?
So my understanding is it's for all of the city, but what
Sure.
they're doing is with that saying, because I know in some cases they'll say, well, we want 80% AMI, when we know actually in CB12, for example, most people can't afford that. That actually it should maybe be more like 60% AMI. And so, you know, and so I think it's kind of, here's the table,
Yeah.
but actually people in our area, the median income is a lot less than kind of what this was based on, but I agree
Yeah,
with you. I think a
certainly
bit more clarity.
Yeah, it would be
Mhm.
more, I think from a statistical perspective, better
Yeah.
if you actually had the data of the
Yep,
area and
it's a
then you
good
could
feedback.
generate those like medians and
Mm-hmm. I'll
work
put
from
that in
a
for a thing.
comparison standpoint.
Yep.
Versus just guesstimating at like, well, I don't think like most
Mhm.
people can afford that, but maybe like people
They can
can
afford
afford
this.
30% of that. It's
Yeah.
a little bit less empirical.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
good point. Thank you.
Maria,
Yes,
may I go back to age-friendly design for a minute?
yes.
Have you got, is the aging committee in the loop, Paul, on how this discussion is moving forward?
Right now, no. Right now, it's just land use and ourselves as housing. I am in the process of sending the draft to all of the chairs of the committees, because obviously I would certainly appreciate their input as well.
Sure. I mean, the couple of thoughts I have is
Please.
that piece of it is uniquely an aging committee.
Mm-hmm.
And there had been some discussions over a period of time. I'm on that committee, so
Mhm.
I'm sort of picking up that discussion hasn't happened
No.
recently.
No. Mm-hmm.
And I also attended the aging committee meeting this morning,
Mm-hmm.
at which we're trying to work through what are the discussions. Pretty similar to here.
Yep.
What are the discussions for upcoming meetings? So
Mm-hmm.
I encourage that in the short run.
Yep. No, sounds good. Thank you. Yeah, no, definitely on the list. I think it was kind of like, let's first get the key bits in, and then let's go ahead and share with everyone else once we at least have a decent draft. But certainly appreciate that point.
Can you also add language specifically on requiring deep affordability based on anything that's publicly subsidized?
Based on what?
Anything that's publicly subsidized. I mean, anybody getting a tax break.
Yeah.
Anything where public money is
Yeah.
used, it should always be affordable
Mm.
to the community. And then on the
Yeah.
result part,
Mhm.
Can I do a quick clarification? Do you have a definition of what public
Yeah.
money is? I.e., I want to make sure it
tax
includes
incentives.
tax breaks, tax incentives,
Mhm.
infrastructure improvements that are targeted to a particular site or development or street or whatever.
Can you send that to
That's
me?
the broadest
I'll make sure that I have
possible
it.
Okay.
definition of public money.
But I want to make sure that I capture that correctly, so I don't miss it.
And you put at the resolved
Mhm.
private developers, but you didn't say anything about nonprofit developers. I mean, we should say we prefer nonprofit.
Yeah, I agree. Let me see. I put here, what did I put? I have here community organizations, but maybe I should shift that and put, maybe change it to be nonprofit developers. So is your suggestion?
Or at it, I mean,
I mean-
if you want to keep private there, it's just, you know, you can hold nonprofits more accountable than
Mhm.
private developers.
Mhm.
They have values.
Some values, and they also get a lot of public money.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
that's true too.
Oh,
I have
Awesome.
one quick note that I may add. I'm not sure if this
Please.
is the right place, but something that I've been thinking about is like how we are capturing how
Mhm.
many students, like college students, live in our district,
Mm.
because I feel like it really, like, we kind of just gloss over that, right? And I think it impacts the availability of units and the pricing of units, right? Because if you can get somebody whose parents are gonna pay
Mhm.
$1,000 per room,
It's crazy.
you know, figuring out how much a year than they would to a family,
Mhm,
and most families can afford it. So I'm not sure like how we can factor that in, but It's been on my
It
mind.
results,
My
won't
building
sell
is
any
like-
property to the school.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know.
Just
That
something
would
to,
probably
like,
be
keep
hard
in the
to,
back.
so
Okay,
yeah,
maybe
it's a really great
y'all-
question. One second, Tanisha, and then we'll turn it over to you. It probably would be hard to capture that,
Yeah.
but what I will say is actually something that was raised during the City of Yes housing opportunities, because one of the things that they're proposing, particularly for and Wayne asked a really good question around kind of the sizing of the units,
Mhm.
that some of the units weren't necessarily family friendly. They're talking about kind of these micro-sized units that would be, for instance, for like single, young professionals or college students and things like that. And one of the things we kind of pushed back on is like, this is a heavily kind of, intergenerational, a lot of intergenerational families. And so we don't want to kind of break that up. And so that's one of the concerns that was raised, but it's a really good thing to keep in mind. Kind of the size.
And
of
I
the
don't know
units.
if you guys saw this
Mhm.
lawsuit on the preference for housing.
Yeah.
I was looking at that a little bit.
Mhm.
Kind of annoying.
Yeah, yep, so much happening. Tanisha, you had your hand up.
I can speak now? I had my
Yes,
hand up
please.
for a
Sorry.
while. No,
Sorry, we didn't see it. Go ahead.
Anyway, to piggyback on what the young lady said, Columbia is buying up a lot of property in Harlem and Washington Heights to do just that. They are also using other names of LLCs that they own to do it. It is a big issue, and that was my question. First of all, am I seeing a copy of this resolution that I don't see, or we're doing it right now?
No one is voting on anything. This is a draft based off
No,
of
I
what
didn't say
the
we was
feedback
voting on
everyone.
anything. That's not what I
Hold
asked.
on, Tanisha, hold on. Slow down. Hold on. I said I was going to send it to everyone because right now, what I drafted was based off of the feedback from last month, and it's only been shared with Wayne, Kathy, and Carmen de la Rosa's office. And so I will share it with everyone afterwards, but it's going to come from the executive committee because we're doing it closely with land use. So I'll share it and would certainly welcome your feedback on it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm done.
Good, thank you. Anything else on this? I think that's it. Okay, good. I guess the only other thing is I mentioned a little bit around kind of a lot of stuff happening over the coming months. I want to come back really quickly to the City of Yes stuff. There was a public session earlier this week, as I mentioned. I think I heard Tanisha, I think you were on there because I was listening to it and I thought I heard you ask a question. So if you did not have a chance to participate or attend, please do. There's a recording as well, which I think someone from the community board shared, but I'll also make sure that you all receive it. We'll try to get them to come here as well. But really there's like a lot happening and I've unfortunately left my notebook to kind of talk a little bit more about it. But there's a lot happening and, they're going to be doing kind of these ongoing sessions. And we'll certainly encourage you all to get involved with some of that. So can I then move on to new business? Checking to see if there's any new business. Okay. I guess the only thing that I would just include in new business is would certainly appreciate those of you who are interested in kind of taking some of this work forward. It's a lot for one person, to please kind of volunteer yourselves. Shout out to Michelle. Michelle's going to kind of lead on following up with like ongoing, current and ongoing developments and figuring out what the status of them are. I know there's one building particularly by not too far from where we're at that's kind of been stalled. It just looks like it's been abandoned. It's been sitting there for like 2 years. There's other buildings where like we don't know what's going on. Jay, you kindly offered to kind of lead on the budget request and following up on that. So thank you. There's obviously a lot of other opportunities to do stuff and get involved. So certainly encourage you to do so. Yeah, please.
Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good.
Is there an opportunity for us to speak with the borough president or to speak with folks from his office and relay some of the like questions or concerns that we have?
Yes, so one in two instances, excuse me. They obviously come to our meetings at the end of the month, or the general meetings, but actually I have a call with Portfolio tomorrow.
Okay.
And so he and I kind of generally touch base on a regular basis and kind of say, hey, this is what the committee's working on. What's, MBPO doing? How can we work together? So those types of things. And so, but also Kathy sits on the kind of the name of the board escapes me. The Borough President's Board, something like that. But it's once a month. And it's shared by, kind of his team. And often he's there as well. And Kathy represents CB12, and she can also raise concerns and issues there. And actually, that reminds me, there is one thing under new business, if I can add. I had reached out to Department of Buildings to come and present this evening. Unfortunately, which I think, and I've raised this with Kathy's aware, they came back, responded, they wanted to come, but apparently because of the budget cuts that are happening across the city, apparently they're not allowed to do like presentations in the evenings.
That is such. Yes.
So I was like,
Oh.
so the point is, it's on Kathy's radar. We're flagging to see what's happening there. Cause I was like, okay, there's other I mean, I don't know if it's like a department thing. I will say that the person who did respond has worked with us really well. So I don't think it's like from that person. But I was like, how are we supposed to engage? They said, oh, well, we can drop off some flyers. I was like, no, we need a little bit more than that.
That's across the spectrum of community meetings, community boards.
Exactly. I agree.
That's how people gather.
I agree. And so I just wanted to put that on your radar that was raised. We're following up to see what's going on, if that's just them, if it's happening across other agencies. But certainly want them to come, particularly around the follow-up for the worst landlords list that always comes out that the public advocate releases. So yes, I will be following up. That was I've had the same reaction as well. I was like, okay. So with that, it's 8:57. Can I get a motion, unless there's anything urgent or, must happen now? I don't see any hands or anything. Nope. A motion to adjourn the meeting. Thank you. Second. Can someone second it?
Second.
Oh, I'm sorry. I did not hear. Do we not want to leave? Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes. No, hold on. No. Why is this not working?
To see what
It's just